So I think that we don't have it in a small file.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, dear colleagues, I invite you to come to the sitting into the plenary space. Good morning, everyone. So a very warm welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us this rainy morning in this very intense week. We are very grateful for all of you who were able to make it, and for those of you that are joining online. I'm going to go straight to the point and welcome our program group director in UNICEF to deliver the opening remarks. George, over to you.
Thank you, Ria. Good morning, colleagues. It's kind of quiet. Good morning, colleagues. I know it's a very important and dense topic, but I'm sure we can start with a few smiles. This agenda item, as you all know, is one of the important ones for us in development. I know it's on the minds of many member states, but it's also on the minds of the UN and our partners here because of the implications for the lives, in our case as UNICEF, the implications for the lives of children in many parts of the world. So I'd like to welcome you to this event. It's a long title, but how we can respond to country demand for technical assistance, capacity building, institutional development, to scale up financing, the important question of financing for sustainable development. So in UNICEF, we are very pleased to be part of those organizing this and convening this. And I have a few key messages as we start the discussions. One is around the urgency, excuse me, the urgency of collaboration as we overcome the challenges that are in the way of achieving the SDGs and fulfilling the rights of children. When we fall short of delivering on the SDGs, children bear the consequences. We estimate that there are about 3, in fact, I think it's a question I should have asked. I know excellencies are here, and we are not supposed to ask excellencies questions. But if you'll indulge me, I'm going to ask this question. And there's a measure that we use, is the people in poverty, households in poverty. But in our case as UNICEF, we refer to only children in poverty. And there are many ways of estimating it. One way is a monetary measure, a certain dollar value, the basics of the basics that if you don't have, you can't really make it. So under this line, there's a number of children globally who suffer from this extreme form of deprivation. And I want to ask if anyone can guess how many children how many millions of children are below this poverty line? Who can guess for me, please? 333 million children. So imagine the United States. Imagine that all of United States are children. That tells you the extent of the problem globally. So to achieve, to achieve our strategic goals for children, we really require adequate financing at all levels, global, regional, and country levels. Yet we know that our financial systems and institutions and laws and regulations are such that financing does not happen automatically. So we must work together to ensure that this happens. The second message I have is to overcome financing challenges, we must realign financial systems and increase funding with an emphasis on efficiency, on adequacy, and on innovation. In practice, it means advocating for increasing development assistance, increasing concessional financing, improving our public finance efficiency, and solving bottlenecks in ministries, whether at the level of the Ministry of Finance or the level of the Ministry of Health, of Education, of Water, and so on. And strengthening and expanding domestic resource mobilization, including, as we know, it's not only on the expenditure side, but also on the tax side. The third and final message is that the INFFs offer a solution to the financing challenges that we face, because they afford countries embarking on financing strategies the opportunity to strengthen social sector spending. And I have a few examples here. We've seen it play out in Botswana. Last year, I had the opportunity to work with a few countries on this on the ground, including in Maldives. We see examples from Rwanda establishing efficient evidence-based budget allocations. We see Mongolia looking more and more at resource-based budgeting. And we see countries that are trying to catch up, like Guinea, looking at private sector options, innovative financing as they move on. So during this event, I wish to kindly invite you to consider the important questions and the medium-term and long-term capacity development process that lies ahead of us. We believe that country-driven and country-led INFFs can unlock a transformation where rights of children are fulfilled everywhere, including children with disabilities. Governments provide adequate financial support to education, to health, to nutrition, to social protection, and to water, where climate adaptation and green transition occur through better utilized opportunities, but through new opportunities, climate finance opportunities that come up. And let's all remember that there are some 360 million people who are caught up in complex situations of war, of turmoil, of recurring disasters. So I'd like to thank you for coming. It's a very important agenda item, as you all know. And I want to thank you for your support in going this journey. I guess it's time to hand over to Mr. Shari Spiegel, the Director of Financing for Development at DESA. And again, warm welcome to our colleagues. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Thank you for having us here and for organizing this event, to UNICEF, to the OECD, and to all the colleagues in the facility who are part of organizing this event, Sweden as well. I think this is a really timely discussion as we start preparations for the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development, which will be held in Spain in 2025. As you probably know, the conference is mandated to focus on reform of the international financial architecture, but all financing for development outcomes since Monterey have been focused on both national actions and global actions. So the Monterey Consensus said that countries are responsible for their own development, but the international community is responsible for an international enabling environment. And it's not really possible to have one to be effective without the other. So any global reforms have to respond to the needs on the ground for countries, what countries and developing countries need. And that an IFA reform, international financial architecture reform, will only be effective once it's delivered on the ground. So once there's a landing space for how that, what those changes will mean for policy on the ground, for people on the ground. And so integrated national financing frameworks can play a key role in this regard. They're really, this was actually the thinking behind them when they were first introduced in the Addis Ababa Action Agenda in 2015. INFFs are really a very simple idea. It's just the question of saying that many countries had been formulating national sustainable development strategies, but very few of those strategies were financed and had where the money was going to come from. And the second piece of it was really thinking about how, as we looked at the SDGs that brought together environmental, social, and governance, to really make sure that financing is looked at across sectors. You know, how does financing here work with financing there? What are the implications? To think of it in an integrated way across policy goals and across sectors and across the impact of different ministries within countries. So the idea was really to bring countries together and to think about how does one make sure that the sustainable development strategies are financed. In some ways, INFFs are probably even more important today. The 2024 FS Financing for Sustainable Development report that was just published, I guess it's already a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago almost, we highlighted the $4 trillion gap in financing for developing countries every year, and also really highlighted a finance divide, how some countries, wealthier countries, are able to have access to financing, but many developing countries have no access to affordable financing. The only way the best way for countries to deal with issues like debt overhangs, et cetera, is to grow. And the best way to grow is through investment. And yet the same countries that need investment the most can't afford it. And so the FSDR said that there's actually a crisis in investment and called for an enormous investment push. This is very much in line with the Secretary General's SDG stimulus. And that one of for us to get the Sustainable Development Goals back online, really there needs to be a investment push. But there's also a growing understanding that any scaled up cross-border financing as well as domestic financing can only be effective if it supports country-led programs. And last week at the discussions at the World Bank IMF spring meetings, as well as discussions this week here, every discussion ends with that. So when we talked about country platforms, the final conclusion is, but countries need plans. Every discussion that we think about leveraging the international system that money has to be aligned with country goals, and every discussion ends with, and countries need national plans. And that's exactly what INFFs are really meant to be doing. The idea is clearly ripe for implementation. We've come a long way since 2015. More than 80 countries now are taking forward national financing frameworks. And the efforts are actually going a step farther now. So the INFF Facility report that will be launched later today, Making Finance Work for People and Planet, it reports that 13 national and subnational governments now have working financing strategies in place. And that's the first step to really having concrete plans for what this means. And so to support these countries, DESA is very proud to be part of the INFF Facility, together with our partners, UNDP, the OECD and UNICEF, as well as the European Commission in Sweden and Italy. But despite joining our efforts and rapidly growing interest in INFFs, the rapidly growing interest in INFFs has certainly sometimes exceeded our capacity to respond. So I'm very grateful that we have this discussion today to see how we can have more of us can join this effort to coordinate support to these country-led efforts. And I hope that some of you can consider participating in the platform to provide technical assistance emerging from national reform processes. And to conclude, I want to go back to where I started on discussions of FFD4, the fourth conference. This week, in many ways, is the start of the preparations for that conference. And INFFs can really be a vehicle for advancing the financing agenda beyond 2025. And we really look forward to working with all of you to make the most of this opportunity. So thank you very much.
Okay. I'm Olivier Catanero. I will be moderating the rest of this session, and I will call on the first panelist who represent, the demand side of the equation. And so I will have Sri Krishna Nepal, who is the Joint Secretary and Chief International Economic Cooperation Coordination Division in the Ministry of Finance of Nepal. I will have Tanya Romualdo, with a permanent representative of Cabo Verde to the United Nations. I have Robert Matsiko, who is a senior economist, Minister of Finance, Planning and Economic Development of Uganda, and Vitalis Mesha, who is Executive Director, Reality of Aid Africa and GPDC non-executive co-chair. So just to remind the speakers that we have a very short timing with a maximum of 5 minutes each, and to respond to the points that were just made by Sherry, with the INFF process. Lots of countries have started to develop their financing strategies. For the SDGs, lots of expectations were created. Now it's time to deliver and to find the way to deliver, the funding, the financing, to deploy the strategies. And the question is how, because we see the needs are so big, how to bring the capacity building and technical assistance to scale to help you deploy all the innovative solutions and that were discussed, for instance, last week in Washington. Many of you might have been there as well. So now, without further ado, I will move to the first speaker from Nepal, Sri Krishna, please.
Thank you very much. So as we move ahead towards 2030, we all are aware that there is huge funding gap to the SDG financing. And then being a small economy, for example, Nepal has limited choices. And the ODA that used to be the conventional resources to finance for SDG actions, so it's not sufficient. And then it, of course, has the catalytic role to leverage other resources. So the INFF, again, I think it gives us a clear roadmap to move. And then it's a very structured, very systematic sort of financing plan. And then it links basically the SDG strategies to the programs and to the financing. So it gives how can we finance, but where that finance exactly is. That's the question. And then this capacity development, technical assistance, the institutional support that comes in this part. So to link right resources to the right actions. For example, ODA to the social sector indicators, the grants, the soft loan to the basic fundamental infrastructures. And then private capital, of course, that's a huge space that we have been discussing, but not been able to capitalize it as we really wanted. So the instruments comes in between. So how to design those instruments? What are the feasible instruments that your country can have in implementation? So this part also is very important. I would say at this point, I think yes, it's a good discussion going on, but we need much more clarity, the support, the assistances to develop those instruments, to design those instruments, and then so that the institutional readiness, the procedural clarity, the next step clarity, that gives at least to initiate. For example, sovereign colored bonds, like for example, green bonds. So how to countries can get benefit of those bonds, because there's countries like us, Nepal, having very low contribution in carbon emissions, and then a lot of positive contributions in mitigations. So how can we capitalize our natural capital so that, for example, debt to climate swap, that could be an innovative instrument. So innovative way that I think is still there. Otherwise, you cannot simply bring and pull some resources and then allocate it to the activities and spend it. That luxury you don't have at this point of time. You have to be innovative. You have to think little differently. You have to see that the complete, I think, the whole picture in a big picture, the entire holistic approach to finance to the SDG activities. So it's really a very difficult time, but we can collaborate with this sort of cooperation and collaboration, like I just heard earlier, the reflection from the speakers. So that's the right idea, like to leverage resources, to leverage strength, to leverage capacities, so that we can at least perform better, and then we can right track the SDG actions. So it's, I think in this part that you can have several areas to collaborate.
No, thank you very much. And that's perfect to set the scene in terms of the appetite. I mean, there is for the use of all those new instruments and facilities, but the capacities to deploy them and identifying the right instrument, the right partner for the right purpose. So that brings me to you, Charlotte, Tanya. For the example of Cabo Verde, because you are also involved in, you mentioned the debt swaps and so on. So if you could give us your perspective on it.
Now it is. Thank you. Good morning to all. Thank you for inviting Cabo Verde to be here too, since this is a very important issue for all countries. But of course, Cabo Verde and SIDS, as being very vulnerable, face specific challenges. For us, the current situation, not the current one, but the post-COVID situation left the country in a very debt distress situation. Immediately after the worst part of COVID, our debt to GDP ratio was 160%, and it was amongst the highest in the world. This macroeconomic situation severely constrained our fiscal policy and restricted, of course, the availability of public financing to address the diversified challenges and urgent needs related to the sustainable development. Indeed, while our new SDG-aligned strategic plan for sustainable development, in Portuguese we call it PATS, calls for the mobilization of 5 billion euro in public and private investment until 2027. Our 2021 NDC update also required an additional 2 billion euro until 2030. In Cabo Verde, during the COVID pandemic and throughout the ongoing polycrisis context, we have been putting strategies, policies, and corresponding actions in place to generate innovative financing solutions from the bottom up. From 2020 onwards, our Ambition 2030 strategic vision, supported by the UN and UNDP, identified blue and green economies as key pillars of economic transition and financial diversification towards autonomous sustainable development. Sustainable financing and human capital emerged as indispensable instruments to finance and implement the mid to long-term SDG and NDC objectives. Throughout the process, Cape Verdean signature solutions arose. The first one is Cape Verde's Blue X initiative. It's a sustainable finance platform developed with our stock exchange together with UNDP and through our integrated national financing framework. The process of this exchange-driven approach is to create a decentralized platform conducive to the convergence of supply of global, regional, and domestic impact investment, with the demand for such financing from public and private entities seeking to develop sustainability and climate-aligned projects. We also always underline climate for obvious reasons. We are SIDS, we are Sahelian, we have severe droughts, cyclical, but still. So climate is one of our top priorities. The second solution arose in the form of a bilateral debt swap with Portugal. And herein we have been able to transform the debt held by the Portuguese Treasury into a climate and environment fund. Among other priorities, this fund will provide essential seed capital to invest in our comprehensive renewable energy transition. This is a long-term development strategy, and it foresees net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Both the agreement and the addendum with Portugal were signed last year. The agreement in the very beginning and the addendum during COP25 at one of the side events. I think for the first part, I will stop here in sake of time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And also for making the link, to the debt issue and to create fiscal space for countries to be able to tackle all the development issues that remain, as well as the questioning of deepening the financial market locally. That is also an important part. Now turning to Robert, if you can give us your own perspective on the topic. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Your Excellencies, and ladies and gentlemen. Uganda's story is not very different from the rest of the previous speakers. From the time we had COVID-19, our debt levels rose up to above 50%, about 56, from around 38. So, and this was attributed to domestic financing, but especially the domestic debt. So we developed the INFF framework and the PIFs. We launched the PIFs, the Public Investment Financing Strategy. With support from the UNDP, we did the development finance assessment. Had the PIFs, very good document, very good laid out strategies on how to link development planning to financing. But the challenge is how to realize the financing. We formed a resource alignment committee. We have apex committees that lead the implementation of the SDGs with support from UNDP, and but we are faced with a challenge. The market there is limited access to capital. There is the financial markets are underdeveloped. There is no potential for capacity for institutions to attract private finance and investment. Then even the frameworks are not, the governance frameworks and the policy frameworks needs strengthening. Although there is work that has been done in that area, but a lot still needs to be done, like the development of environmental and social governance guidelines in the Uganda Securities Exchange. So the INFF is there, the PIFs is there, the frameworks are in place, although they need strengthening, but the real reality is how do we finance our budget in the midst of rising debt and also competing priorities like debt service. Debt service is taking up most of the budget, and yet you need to finance essential services like health and education. So your debt service takes the first call to the resources. So there's need and support. There's need for support in terms of building these institutions, making them resilient, and building the capacity of the local markets to generate our own capital, and so we can finance all these different interventions. So national actions are very important. Development of the PPPs, so development of the fixed income market. So these are some of the things, some ideas that we have, but the realization, the support to realize that, technical assistance, capacity development of institutions, the tapping into the green climate finance. We have established a climate finance unit that has done a number of innovations, but of course needs capacity. We have never issued a green bond before. We haven't even attracted the financing itself, developing bankable projects to attract this kind of financing. So that's the kind of capacity that we need, and the support that we need from our development partners. Thank you.
That's excellent. Again, an example, Uganda in the starting blocks, ready to go. Need to fix, to help with the institutions and locally to build the environment that will be conducive for this financing to come and to bring its effects to growth in the country. Thank you very much. And then last, Vitalis, if you could give us your perspective. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And I want to begin by thanking the organizers for inviting me. I want to focus mostly on the issue of technical assistance or technical support with regard to the INFF. I think, first of all, just make a couple of statements and then move to the real issue. One is the official development assistance is indeed an essential pillar of INFF, as its resources are meant to focus on development needs of the poorest population. And in that regard, I think technical assistance has moved from merely being about technical cooperation to capacity building, which I think is very essential, especially on the issues that have already been raised on how we strengthen public institutions. But also to really emphasize the issue of moving technical assistance in this instance towards poverty reduction, towards country ownership, and really respecting the country priorities as identified by the countries themselves, because that's the only way then this process works. And also really looking at how technical assistance lays emphasis on the issue of local participation. And here I mean population participation in its design, because previously, as you know, it was majorly identifying experts to come and occupy the space or fill gaps. But now you're saying, especially in the context of development effectiveness, democratic ownership means you work through a whole society approach where beyond the government, you also engage participation and engagement of citizens in designing programs and initiatives. And in that regard, good governance becomes a very critical condition, especially if you want to realize sustainable outcomes, because citizens are main sustainable infrastructure for realizing sustainable results. Now, then that raises the fundamental question, particularly for us on the development effectiveness side, what are some of the things that are critical to enable capacity or technical support to work in the context of INFFs? One of the things that I think is critical is the issue of co-creation. That is really partnering with government in designing and implementing initiatives that facilitate resource mobilization. I think that is very critical. But secondly, is really not necessarily flying in or parachuting technical experts to come into the capitals to do things, but looking through local experts or regional institutions that are already available from within the environment to operationalize technical assistance or support. And it has to be demand driven. I think that's very critical, because increasingly, especially when you're talking about bankable projects or the new innovative financing, we are seeing a lot of the old methods or ways of doing things where we invite experts from abroad to come and design the bankable projects or to give ideas on how to innovate, but really in the context of supply, but not really being responding to the country needs, which I think is very critical going forward. So how do we then integrate technical assistance in the context of INFFs? I think for one, we need to really remove soft conditionalities in technical assistance and ensure that we really allow country leadership to thrive in terms of identifying what capacity gaps are there and how they want to address those gaps. I've already mentioned the issue of using national and regional expert institutions that are already available. So you don't really need to parachute everyone. The skills, for many years we've developed them, they are already there. It's really how we make use of them. The third point that I want to raise is really focus on skills and knowledge transfers rather than filling gaps, because we want eventually to be able to say that we have been skilled enough, we have the capacity, therefore allow us to continue. The fourth point is to really support capacities gaps that have been identified by the countries themselves and not one that is supplied. So countries like you had Uganda and also Cape Verde have already indicated what those needs are. And we need to respect that and really design programs around that. Coming from a civil society side, I would of course say that it is really important that when we are deploying capacity assistance, that we respect inclusive partnership arrangements. To the extent that we really also design initiatives that empower civil society to be credible partners, to be useful partners in implementing development initiatives, but also in demanding accountability and transparency on various initiatives of the government. Last, we have to be very transparent about accountability lines. And in that regard, technical assistance has to be accountable to the country first, not to the supplier of the assistance. And I think that's very important. And last is the issue of, making technical assistance, especially contracts for the consultants, to be very flexible and not really be about ticking certain box and making sure that certain, objectives or deliverables are there. But we need to understand that in developing countries, situations get very complex. We must allow them to respond to those complexes and not really restrict themselves to countries. I thank you very much.
No, thanks a lot. Yes. Thanks to all, for this. And what I take from the last presentation is also the how to deliver this technical assistance. And the sentence I will take away, it's not enough to fly people in and out. You need to really develop the skills locally and to involve the citizen, into this work. So thank you very much for this first panel. Now we'll play a little bit the musical chairs, and if you can go back, but for the second round, you will have, you can speak from your chair, so be ready to to be called once again. And now, if I may call on the second part of the session, the second panel, which is on the supply side, how to respond to everything that was just said in the first session. So I have first is Carsten Storr, the chair of the OECD Development Assistance Committee. Please join us. Yes, Carsten. Okay. Then I have Charlotta Schlitter, ambassador for ECOSOC at the Permanent Mission of Sweden to the United Nations. Then I have Antti Karunen, Director for Sustainable Finance, Investment and Jobs, Directorate General for International Partnerships at the European Commission. Welcome. And Tom Bello, Director at Interim, Sustainable Finance Hub of UNDP. Thank you. Welcome all. And I will start with you, Carsten. I mean, you just heard, I mean, pressing demand. And I know that the DAC members do a lot individually and have lots of expertise. So the question now is how to bring it up to scale, how to, in the spirit of effectiveness, deliver better for more systematically to leave no one behind and satisfy this demand. Carsten, if you have thoughts on that, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, and thank you, Olivier, for this. Thank you also to the panelists in the first panel, because it was really clear diagnostics in terms of what are the problems and where we need to respond. But let me then also step back a little bit and say, when I look at it from my perspective, chair of the OECD DAC, basically the focal point for delivery of ODA, of development aid. On one hand, we have a success story in the way that we have the largest amount of ODA ever, $224 billion in 23. Even if you take out Ukraine, even if you take out Indo refugee costs, even if you take out COVID-19, there is an increase in ODA from 2019 pre-COVID to 2023 of 7.5% in real terms. So it is a success story in many ways that we're able to mobilize more and more ODA, and have been at least for the past 5 years. But at the same time, there is a huge pressure on ODA. It has to so many purposes. There's so many things that we need to use ODA for, including increasing humanitarian needs. And you see that demonstrated every day now in Gaza. So there is clearly pressure here. I think when we talk about technical support, technical capacity building, institutional development, we are basically, I think, still in the very, very center of ODA. You can say, have many ways the sweet spot. Because if you look at the core of ODA, what we want to use ODA for most of all is to help countries drive reforms that can create results, that can create impact, that can help mobilize other resources. ODA is small compared to the needs. Sherry mentioned the $4,000 billion in investment needs. ODA is 5-6% of that. So we need to look at the mobilization fact. And then if we look at the whole issue of capacity building, institutional development, and technical support, we are at the very center of that. So I think that there is basically an open door. I see very clearly that we would need to focus much more on development effectiveness when we come to FFD. It's part of Addis, of course, but we need to reinvent certain aspects of that, because it is a gearbox of what when we look at results and impact, then then effectiveness is the gearbox, and the technical input into that is critical. And I think that's something that we need to highlight quite a lot. I think the INFF process is really useful enough. It's also clear that when we talk about technical support of the need for capacity institutions, we are moving into a new uncharted territory. We have been, and we look back to Addis, it's very much about debt management, public finance management. It's also about development of capital markets. It's about at least domestic resource mobilization. Those are all well-known issues, are so far still underexploited and underexplored in many ways. in the sense that we need to do much more there. But on top of that, we then have the need to go into new uncharted territories. We do have a lot of work to do on carbon credit, on sustainability bonds of many, many different sorts, and on debt swaps and other innovative means. So the traditional workload that we have and have not maybe fulfilled so much as we would like to have done is now being added to the new tasks to be done. So it's really a challenge, and I think we should recognize that it is a challenge. One of the things that has been discussed a bit at in the OECD circles has been what can we do in order to square demands and supply. One of the issues that come up is that maybe there could be a virtual matchmaking platform somehow where you could square demands of countries with at least the supply facilities that DAC members, the 31 members of the EU Commission do. So far, it's basically an idea, and it has to be explored much more. And we need to be sure that there is an appetite for it, and both within DAC and with partners and so on. But I think we need some mechanisms where we can do more in order to highlight what are the demands and what are supply potentials. That can have many forms, shapes, and colors, but I think it has to be something that can come out of it. It's also very, very clear, and I will go back to what the first panel said, that we need to be, this has to be demand-driven. It's crucial that donor supply should not overtake partner demand, and that we know all the mechanics, and in that we know the inherent bureaucratic tendencies in some of these things, but we need to fight that. And I think that would be very, very critical in what we're doing. So I think I'll limit myself to that, but I think kind of new innovative mechanisms that can highlight this, give it more life and more ambition, I think would be welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Karsten, and I mean lots of points. I mean the first one I take is on the core role of ODA in that, whether it's the assistance is provided directly, but also channeled, ODA channeled through international organizations to deliver, and also whether and how we can innovate in terms of matching the demand with the supply, and including the idea of developing a platform for the different actors to meet the demands that emerge, and we'll talk about it from the INFFs. So now turning to Charlotta, and to give us the perspective of Sweden and what efforts you are undertaking under this umbrella. And including, because you're one of the main supporters also of the INFF and the INFF Facility. So now next to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I also took a lot from the first panel about what the obstacles are, but also there's a lot of innovative efforts happening at country level. And we have to try to do our part to be there and support. And I want to also start a little bit with where Karsten started with ODA. As something that will not, I mean, the ODA will always be too limited to provide all the answers, but ODA is, as I think somebody said earlier, has the ability to be catalytic, and it's important that we don't lose ground on the ODA. We have to keep the levels up. From our side, we have kept the levels up. We're around this year 0.9% of GNI to ODA. We hope in the next year, towards the next conference, that other donors will step up and provide even higher levels than at this time. And for us, we believe in the UN, so we provide a lot of our ODA actually goes to the UN, to UNICEF, and who were mentioned here, and because and also as core, because we want these organizations to be able to be agile to assist countries where they are. So that's a little bit our framework. So that hasn't changed. What will be changing a bit is that we're looking at precisely reforming our development cooperation to find more synergies between development and trade and private capital and all these things that we have been talking about. And so obviously the INFFs are, it's encouraging that so many countries are now have them or are on moving in this direction. I heard what you said, Karsten, interesting thoughts on what's needed to match. So happy to listen more to any such ideas. A little bit about what we do. Some of it we were already doing, some of it we may do more of, and I'm talking about obviously the work of the CEDA. A couple of the colleagues are here. There's a broad toolbox that have been important challenge funds to provide startups and small and medium-sized enterprises with capacity to develop innovations. We facilitate partnerships between actors, private sector, civil society, academia in Sweden, and twinning of Swedish government authorities with government authorities in countries which are interested in such twinning is something we've been doing a lot, not least with the tax authorities. And I take what Vitaly says, it's not always, how helpful is Swedish tax authorities twinning. Maybe it's more helpful to find somebody in the region, but it's often, I think, when tax specialists talk to other tax specialists, they speak a language that I wouldn't follow. And often those twinning projects are quite good for that reason. Guarantees is the last thing I'd like to mention. Our guarantee frame is $2.6 billion US dollars now. The idea is obviously to help mobilize private capitals through lowering perceived risk and in that way help enable investments in sustainable development. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And we heard as well, so ready to step up Sweden and to respond to some of the demand and with agility and in the spirit of partnership. And I like your idea of twinnings, and which means that at all levels, I think partnerships that are necessary, including at subnational, but also, and now turning to Antti, you also with the European Union, major actor, major supporter also of the INFF, yourself also having to deal with the coordination and you're doing with Global Gateway, but also in this specific case, the Sustainable Finance Advisory Hub. So how do you see all those initiatives can be articulated with the other donors? What are you doing and how to bring it all together up to scale? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Oliver, and good morning to everybody, and also thanks a lot to all the panelists for very good insights. Let me start by just saying that we think that the INFFs are really an important building block for accelerating progress towards the SDGs and climate goals. So I very much in welcoming and encouraging new partners to join this effort. We see it as an important tool for both the partner countries and for development partners. For the countries, it strengthens medium and long-term planning and supports long-term investments. And for development partners like EU, they are a tool for transparency and predictability, and thus they help us better tailor our support. So we've been very much supporting the INFFs from the beginning and really happy to see how they are picking up. Every time I come to New York or speak with Tom or others, it's 10 more countries. So it's I think, a success story. So a few words about the EU and how we are responding to the demands of technical support. As Karsten said, there is a lot of obvious synergies between domestic revenue mobilization, public finance management, and the INFFs. And so by ensuring effective and efficient collection of domestic revenues and then their strategic allocation and use through a robust public finance management, countries can mobilize resources available to finance their sustainable development. And for us, we support that in many ways. We have a system called Collect More, Spend Better. It's an approach whereby we help partner countries both on the revenue and on the expenditure side. So on the revenue side, what we support is increasing tax collection through efficient tax administration and equitable tax policies. Tax revenues are the most predictable source of financing for essential public services like health, education, and infrastructure investment. And in fact, in 1921, we committed to double our support to domestic revenue mobilization and that by 25. And in fact, we walked the talk so that we already reached this target in 23. So on the spending side, then we focus on the strategic allocation and efficient use of the resources for a direct benefit of the population, which then includes, for example, two issues which are very important: public investment management and secondly, public procurement systems. And if these work well, that really boosts investor confidence and helps attract private sector funding and financing coming into the country. We also work on budget transparency and oversight, which are essential to hold decision makers accountable for collecting and spending funds. So how do we work in practice? We have multiple forms of supporting. First, we do financial support to initiatives implemented by international organizations such as the UN, IMF, the World Bank, and the OECD. And second, we do in country, we do budget support, where improvements in domestic revenue mobilization, for example, and PFM are then key in order for us to allow dispersing our financial support. And then third, we do technical assistance and training and capacity building projects locally, regionally, and at country level. So it's a triple approach that helps us increase the impact of EU capacity development efforts and supports successful implementation INFFs. So then on the sustainable finance more particularly, as was highlighted by colleagues from Uganda and others, there is a rapidly growing demand from countries to build conducive environment for sustainable finance. This obviously so that it helps private financial flows to be channeled towards sustainable investments in partner countries where currently these flows are not going. So we have just had something called the high-level expert group on sustainable finance. Tom was there. Thank you, Tom, for that. And the recommendations of this group are coming out very soon. We hope really in the coming weeks. And the emphasis there, among other things, is on capacity building and support to reinforce the local capital market ecosystems. And so therefore, the Team Europe, together with our partners, UNDP, UNEP, and regional development banks, we really try to meet the demand for coherent and coordinated support through what is called the Sustainable Finance Advisory Hub. So we will work together with the countries in their efforts to attract international private capital for sustainable investments. And the hub can support countries, for example, in developing credible sustainable finance frameworks, such as taxonomies or disclosure requirements and standards, and also help central banks and supervisors and financial institutions to integrate sustainability considerations in their work. The hub will also provide technical assistance to help develop and grow green bond markets in EU partner countries and promote their green bond issuances, which then will be part of our global green bond initiative. And Charlotte mentions guarantees. We do a lot of the sustainable finance really with the help of our guarantee system, EFSD Plus. It's a rather big guarantee offer, and sustainable finance is one of the windows under which we work there. And that is very much part of the global gateway, which Oliver mentioned. So just maybe to the idea of the matchmaking. I mean, as Pastor said, it's an idea. We're happy to explore further, see whether and how it might make sense. And finally, one word about encouraging countries to use the total official support for sustainable development, the TOSSD data, as part of the mapping of the resources available in the assessment and monitoring phases of their INFFs. So this is a comprehensive TOSSD statistical framework to measure the full array of official resources and mobilize private funding supporting sustainable development. So just to finish, I've been too long maybe, but we will continue to support the INFFs, and we are really pleased that they are taking such a prominent role as we are now moving towards the FFD Forum. So thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, and for giving concrete examples on how you deploy your efforts, and also for bringing the value chain perspective of technical assistance and capacity building, from collecting the funding to how to disperse it to have more impact. So now turning to Tom, and you are part of the INFF process. You collecting the demand in the field and try to convey it to the other providers, and you also provide technical assistance yourself, as was mentioned previously. So please give us your perspective on the topic. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Oliver. And maybe I'll make 3 points and give 3 examples as quickly as possible. And I'll draw from the experience we have leading technical assistance for the INFFs in that 86 country portfolio. The first point to make is that, we're by no means doing that alone. And most important for us to recognize in UNDP and development institutions as a whole, that we are development institutions. We are not financial institutions. And so all of our work is about brokering partnerships with financial institutions in ways that bring sustainable development to their transactions and to the reforms that they support. The first point about the INFF is it really is a sovereign financing plan with the emphasis on sovereign. And this is critically important because it means that the reforms, the instruments, the transactions that are included in INFFs are the government's priorities behind which we can align our support. So it is a vehicle for aligning capacity development and technical assistance. The second point to make is INFFs allow us to link transactions to systems. And, the transactions are the sexy stuff, right? The bond that raises $1 billion, the reform to the tax architecture that raises the extra money. But behind that and linked to that are the more boring and persistent challenges of systemic reform that we need to address. And an INFF allows us to link transactions to systems, to processes of change. And the third point to make on INFFs is it enables partnerships that perhaps are a bit unusual to the development community, way beyond donors and aid, towards stock exchanges, investors, financial institutions, development banks. And the matchmaking really needs to incorporate those actors much more. So three examples of where technical assistance in the context of an INFF has been linked to systemic change. One is around public finance reform, and I'm looking at Aurea because a lot of the work we do to align budgets with sustainable development requires us to look at budgets from different policy perspectives. So we partnered with UNICEF in a number of countries to look at how social protection, children, environment, climate can all be embedded in a budgetary process to align public finance with sustainable development. We've also partnered with the IMF. For example, in Bangladesh, we supported the government to put in place a climate fiscal framework, which enables $2 billion from its own budgetary resources to go towards climate action. The IMF worked with us to then release $1.4 billion from their Resilience and Sustainability Trust Fund behind that climate fiscal framework. So again, linking transactions and systemic reforms. We had a brilliant panel yesterday with what's called the GISD, Global Investors for Sustainable Development, in Sweden, with DESA and UNDP. This was a session focused on SDG bonds. And again, we heard from Indonesia and Mongolia how they issued SDG bonds with our support alongside financial institutions and linked the issuance to changes in their budgetary frameworks, changes in their policy and regulation like taxonomies, which Antti has mentioned, and linked again those transactions to systemic reforms. The final point, example, sorry, that I wanted to give is just to follow on from Antti, because we're very happy to provide support also for the Sustainable Finance Advisory Hub behind unlocking capital from the EU to developing economies. And an unlikely partnership again has grown out of that as we provide support to Zambia and the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Lusaka Stock Exchange. And it's training for corporates to issue bonds, green bonds, and it's training for the Security and Exchange Commission to put in place a regulatory framework for those green bonds. A $200 billion green bond has already been issued in Zambia. This is like one of the most debt-distressed countries in the world, but still there's potential to unlock private capital through the stock exchange there. And our unlikely partner, talking of matchmaking again, was the Luxembourg Stock Exchange, which has huge capacity and experience on green bonds. So really those were 3 points and 3 examples, which I hope show some of the way UNDP looks at technical assistance in this space.
Excellent. And so I take your 3 points. I mean, the alignment ones that was already mentioned several times. I mean, the linking the transactions to the systemic reforms, and finally, I mean, the linking, I mean, matchmaking the different actors, who needs what and who can provide what, and how to ensure the different actors communicate one way or another to deliver at scale for the needs. So we are running a bit late, but we started late. But I wanted to go back to the first panelist. I mean, to give them a chance to react to the presentations and to add any points they wanted. Basically in a couple of minutes, not even a couple of minutes. We're 1.5 minutes each. And please.
Thank you very much. Very good to hear from the development partner side. We were raising a couple of issues related to country-driven model, country ownership, and then balancing demand and supply, and then what could be the realistically doable and feasible way the arrangement that could support leveraging resources in regards to this climate finance, and then debt for climate swaps, and then other innovative instruments. In this part as well, I think we have several space to collaborate. So in this part, NIFF, of course, INFF, that would definitely be structuring the financing, prioritizing things, and then giving much more clarity in a systematic manner, but ultimately to deliver that. So we should have come through an instrument, through resources, to access on those resources, to mobilize those resources. Otherwise, we cannot have the SDGs in action. So this part in particular, so how can we better be collaborating? I think mobilizing those technical assistances, supports, knowledge sharing, so that domestic, the country-driven model, that the real local need to also be addressed, and feasibility. What we deserve, what country, because it has to be country to country models. One size fits all, that would not really be working in this very complex international financing architecture. The financing flows is not easy. So we have to realize this. So bankable projects that was discussed earlier. So how can we bring in private capital in an arrangement that would definitely be attracting private sector? So these are several areas like we have to collaborate. So it's really, really urgent to deeply understand, to deeply realize this, and then start to deliver. That I really want to underline. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you also to the panelists that were very interesting and deep insight on our topic. As the global financial architecture reform very slowly unfolds, there's also an urgent need to accelerate the developing processes. We need to quickly and significantly scale up technical assistance and capacity building in FSDs to avoid that the global south, and in particular its most vulnerable groups, among which SIDS, are left behind. For SIDS, there's a very serious scale problem. It affects our macroeconomic systems, including the state budget. To put this into perspective, even if we allocate the entire state budget to sustainable development, it wouldn't be sufficient to meet the necessary financing targets. So we need to work on this aspect. A second point that although the efforts that are being deployed domestically by the affected countries, we still need a range of corresponding and complementary financing services with the potential to generate new value, including environmental, social, economic returns on investment. The next steps in the Blue X platform development in Cabo Verde, of course, involve internationalization and regionalization. By the end of last year, the first blue bond listed on our exchange was also listed on the Luxembourg Green Exchange, just mentioned a while ago by the director of UNDP. So the Luxembourg Green Exchange is the world's leading platform for green bonds. And I would, if it's still allowed, just add 3 quick notes. In Cabo Verde, we will continue to build on our excellent governance record, on our institutional capacities and competitive human capital to achieve our very ambitious development goals. One of them is the eradication of extreme poverty by 2026, not 30, 26. 2, Cabo Verde is open to explore mutual development and business opportunities, both with partners and investors. And the final note, we also stand ready to share our modest know-how and provide similar services across Africa, other developing regions, and SIDS, of course, in the context of South-South and SID-SID cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, the panelists. Very, very good insights. I realize we have everything on the supply side, so it's how we tap into them on the demand side. So, but just my simple remark is the simplicity. How do we make this accessible in a simple way without stringent without a stringent route to access? Maybe that's something that we really need support on. Because firstly, our economies investing in these systems alone that will unlock private capital is also not prioritized. So it's the simplicity with which we access this that will create a difference. Because even simple things to unlock private capital, investments there are no funds. We have to borrow for such things. So just simplicity. Secondly, I think we have to work on credit rating frameworks and how to make that one simple as well. Because without good credit rating, some of these things are very complex. I appreciate the idea that we need to strengthen the domestic revenue mobilization. That's another key point where we need to a lot of support, both technical and in terms of capacity building. Thank you very much.
Yeah, very first, two things. One is really the question of country leadership in designing their capacity needs. I think we really need to strengthen that. And I really like Castor's point on the issue of coming up with a database or platform where countries are able to identify and place their needs or requirements, and then development partners respond to that. So it should be based at the national level, and I think country leadership can help with designing that so that the supply side can respond to that demand. Lastly, and I'd like to align myself with the issue of KEBAD, that really it's also about enabling technical support within South-South triangular cooperation. And I think going forward, we really need to support and strengthen such initiatives because they are more sustainable and useful. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And I won't attempt to summarize it all, but we had great perspectives. I mean, and there is a clear demand at the same time. I mean, there is clearly supply, and lots is already happening. So we are typically in a case of a market failure here. And the question is how to fix it. And that's something for the INFF, facility partners to reflect on platform or way to make demand match better with supply. And I take Robert's point, and that the purpose of it is to simplify it all, because there is lots happening, lots of offer on the table, but it's very difficult to be directed at the right partner, to choose the right instrument and so on. So for us to go back to the drawing board, I think with colleagues and in the INFF facility, and try to crack this nut so that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, I think, as we say in English. And I thank you again, all the panelists who have been very diligent with the time also, and so that you can now move to the plenary session of the FFD Forum. Thanks again to all, and round of applause.
From the speakers and the panelists.